Emma Thompson clutched the worn leather wallet in her trembling hands, counting the coins for the third time. The early morning rush at Boston's downtown coffee shop buzzed around her, but she barely noticed the crowd. Her fingers traced each quarter and dime, adding up to exactly $2.75, just enough for a small coffee to help her through another exhausting day. The sleepless night showed on her face, dark circles beneath her hazel eyes telling the story of endless hours spent sewing custom dresses for her growing alterations business. At 28, she carried the weight of single motherhood with quiet determination, though some days felt heavier than others. This morning, after dropping her 6-year-old daughter Lily at daycare, the familiar knot of worry had settled in her stomach again. "Next customer, please," called the barista, her voice cutting through Emma's thoughts. As she stepped forward, the coins pressed into her palm, Emma noticed the man standing behind her in line. Something about him caught her attention, perhaps the expertly tailored charcoal suit or the kind expression in his deep brown eyes. He was typing on his phone, but she could feel his occasional glance in her direction. "Just a small coffee, please," Emma said softly, already placing the counted coins on the counter. Her cheeks flushed slightly, aware of how long she'd taken to count out exact change. "Wait," a warm voice called from behind her. The well-dressed man stepped forward, his presence both commanding and gentle. "Add a breakfast sandwich to the ladies' order, and I'll have a large Americano." Before Emma could protest, he had already handed his credit card to the barista. "Oh, no, please, you don't have to," she began. But he smiled, and something about that smile seemed hauntingly familiar. "I insist," he said. "Everyone deserves a proper breakfast." As they waited for their orders, he introduced himself. "I'm Daniel Carter," he said, studying her face with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. "You know, this might sound strange, but you look incredibly familiar." Emma shifted nervously, clutching her wallet. "I'm Emma Thompson. And thank you, really, but you didn't have to—" "Thompson?" Daniel's eyes widened slightly. "Did you used to live on Maple Street, house number 247? The question stopped Emma in her tracks. Memories flooded back, a little boy next door with scraped knees and a missing front tooth, sharing popsicles on hot summer days. "Danny? Little Danny Carter from next door?" His face broke into a broad grin. "The very same. Though I hope I've grown up a bit since then." Emma couldn't believe it. 23 years had passed since the Carters had moved away, leaving her 5-year-old self devastated at losing her best friend. Now here he stood, transformed from the scrappy kid who used to chase butterflies with her into this successful-looking man. As they collected their orders, Daniel gestured to a small table by the window. "Do you have a few minutes? I'd love to catch up." Emma glanced at her watch. She should head to her tiny alterations shop, but something made her nod. "A few minutes," she agreed. Over coffee and the sandwich she wouldn't have been able to afford, Emma found herself opening up about the past years, her failed marriage to Lily's father, who had abandoned them 3 years ago, her struggles to build her alterations business, and her dreams of launching her own clothing line someday. Daniel listened intently, his coffee forgotten. He shared his own story, building a tech company from scratch, its recent successful sale to a major corporation, and his fresh start after a difficult divorce. What he didn't mention was just how successful that sale had been, or the complex custody battle he was still fighting with his ex-wife over their shared property. As Emma described Lily's latest artistic masterpiece, a crayon drawing of their small apartment filled with flowers, Daniel's phone buzzed repeatedly. He glanced at it with a frown. "Everything okay?" Emma asked, noting his changed expression. "Just my ex-wife," he said, declining the call. She's having trouble accepting the divorce terms." He paused, then added carefully, "Emma, I know this might seem forward, but would you consider having dinner with me tonight? For old time's sake." Emma's heart raced. The practical part of her mind reminded her of all the reasons to say no. The daycare pickup, the alterations waiting at her shop, the vast difference in their current lives. But something in Daniel's warm eyes, something that reminded her of shared childhood secrets and innocent friendship, made her want to say yes. Before she could answer, the coffee shop door burst open. A striking woman in designer clothes stormed toward their table, her face twisted with anger. "So this is why you're not answering my calls, Daniel?" she spat, her eyes raking over Emma with undisguised contempt. Emma felt her cheeks burn as other customers turned to stare. Daniel stood quickly, his expression hardening. "Victoria, This is completely inappropriate. We're divorced. You can't keep doing this." The woman, Victoria, laughed bitterly. "Divorced? The ink isn't even dry on the papers and you're already slumming it with—" "That's enough," Daniel cut her off, his voice quiet but firm. "Emma is a childhood friend, not that it's any of your business. Please leave, or I'll have security escort you out." Emma stood, gathering her things with trembling hands. "I should go," she whispered. "Thank you for the coffee and everything." As she hurried toward the door, she heard Daniel calling her name, but she couldn't turn back. The morning sun hit her face as she stepped outside, and she took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. What had she been thinking? Their worlds were too different now. She was halfway down the block when she heard rapid footsteps behind her. "Emma, wait!" Daniel called out. "Please, don't let Victoria ruin this. At least let me explain." Emma stopped, her hand clutching her wallet where those carefully counted coins still waited, a reminder of the reality of her world, a world that seemed very far from Daniel Carter's complicated life. Emma's heart pounded as she turned to face Daniel. The morning sun caught his worried expression, and for a moment she saw a flash of that little boy from her childhood, the one who had always tried to make things right. "Can we talk somewhere quieter?" Daniel asked, gesturing to a small park across the street. "I owe you an explanation, and there's so much I want to ask you." Against her better judgment, Emma nodded. They found a bench away from the morning commuters, where autumn leaves danced around their feet. Daniel loosened his tie, suddenly looking less like a polished businessman and more like someone carrying a heavy burden. "Victoria and I," he began, running a hand through his dark hair. "Our divorce has been complicated. She's having trouble accepting that it's over. When I sold my company 6 months ago, things got worse. She's convinced herself that I planned the timing to affect the settlement." Emma listened, her fingers absently tracing the worn edges of her wallet. "It must be difficult," she offered quietly, thinking of her own failed marriage, though her ex-husband had simply walked away, leaving her with nothing but bills and broken promises. "The truth is," Daniel continued, his voice softening, "seeing you this morning brought back so many memories. Do you remember that tree house your dad built us? The one with the secret compartment in the floor?" A smile tugged at Emma's lips. "Where we hid our treasure map. Dad helped us make it look old by staining it with tea. And we buried that time capsule in your backyard," Daniel added, his eyes lighting up, "with my favorite Hot Wheels car and your mother's costume jewelry. Those were the happiest days of my childhood, Emma. Everything felt possible then." "I dug it up," Emma admitted, surprising herself. "After you moved away, I was so angry that you left without saying goodbye. I took the car but reburied everything else. I still have it, actually, the car. It's silly, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it away." Daniel's face fell. "I wanted to say goodbye. That morning when my parents rushed us into the car, my father had lost his job and we were about to lose the house. They didn't want anyone to know. I begged to see you one last time." Emma felt tears prickling at her eyes. "I waited at my window every day for weeks, hoping you'd come back. Mom tried to explain that you'd moved far away, but I kept believing you'd return. I wrote you letters," Daniel revealed, moving closer on the bench. "Dozens of them. But my mother, she thought it would be easier if we made a clean break. She never mailed them. I found them years later in a box in her attic. She'd kept them all." A young mother passed by with a little girl about Lily's age, sending a jolt of reality through Emma. The little girl's laughter echoed across the park, reminding her of her own responsibilities. "I should get to work," she said, standing up. "My clients are waiting." "Your alterations shop, where is it?" Daniel asked, also rising. "Maybe I could stop by later. See your work?" Emma hesitated. Her tiny studio above the Chinese restaurant was a far cry from the world Daniel now inhabited. The familiar shame crept in, the same feeling she got when other parents saw her dropping Lily off at daycare in her worn-out car. "It's not much," she said softly. "Just a small place on Carlton Street." "I'd love to see it," he insisted. Then, more carefully, "Emma, about dinner tonight. I understand if you'd rather not, after what happened with Victoria. But I'd really like a chance to catch up properly, to hear about your life, your daughter." Before Emma could respond, her phone buzzed. It was a text from the daycare. Lily had a fever. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, gathering her bag. "It's my daughter. She's sick. I have to go." "Let me drive you," Daniel offered immediately. "Please, it's the least I can do." Emma started to refuse, but another text made her phone buzz urgently. Looking at the screen, her heart sank. Lily's temperature was rising and the daycare needed her to come immediately. "Okay," she conceded. "Thank you." Daniel's car, a sleek black Mercedes, stood out starkly against the weathered buildings of downtown Boston. As they drove to the daycare, Emma couldn't help but notice how naturally Daniel asked about Lily, showing genuine concern. It was so different from her ex-husband, who had barely acknowledged their daughter's existence even before he left. At the daycare, Emma rushed inside while Daniel waited in the car. She emerged carrying a flushed and teary-eyed Lily, who clung to her mother's neck. To Emma's surprise, Daniel had already cleared the back seat, laying his suit jacket down as a makeshift pillow. "My apartment's on Beacon Hill," Emma said hesitantly, knowing it was in the opposite direction from the wealthy areas where Daniel likely lived. "Just tell me where to go," he said simply, adjusting the car's temperature when he noticed Lily shivering. As they drove, Emma caught him watching them in the rearview mirror, his expression softening whenever Lily whimpered. Emma stroked Lily's hair, worrying about the clients she'd have to cancel and the income she'd lose. A particularly expensive bridesmaid's dress alteration was due tomorrow, and she had barely started it. The bride had already paid half the fee, money Emma had used for Lily's new winter coat. "Here," Emma said finally, pointing to a worn brick building. She expected Daniel to simply drop them off, but he was already parking the car. "Let me help you get her inside," he insisted, opening Emma's door before she could protest. His hand brushed her arm as he helped her out, sending an unexpected warmth through her body. As they climbed the narrow stairs to her third-floor apartment, Emma was acutely aware of the peeling wallpaper, the faint smell of cooking oil from the restaurant below, the general shabbiness she usually tried to ignore. But Daniel showed no reaction, focusing instead on carrying Lily's backpack and asking the little girl gentle questions about how she felt. Inside the small apartment, Emma's face burned as she noticed the breakfast dishes still in the sink, the basket of unfolded laundry on the couch. But Lily's fever was rising, and those concerns had to wait. "The bathroom's through there," Emma directed, pointing. "Could you wet a washcloth with cool water?" Daniel moved through her tiny apartment with surprising ease, returning with not just the washcloth, but also a glass of water and the children's Tylenol he'd spotted on the counter. As Emma settled Lily on the pull-out couch that served as her bed, she noticed Daniel taking in the crayon drawings covering the fridge, the small sewing machine set up in the corner, the carefully mended curtains that couldn't quite hide their age. His phone buzzed again. It had been buzzing periodically throughout their drive. This time, Emma caught a glimpse of the screen, a message from Victoria. "Your lawyer can't protect you forever. I know about the offshore accounts. Don't think you can hide them." Daniel quickly silenced the phone, but Emma had seen enough. The distance between their worlds suddenly felt vast again. Here she was, worrying about making rent, while Daniel dealt with offshore accounts and legal battles with his wealthy ex-wife. "I should go," Daniel said quietly, reading her expression. "But Emma, please don't let this morning be the end. There's something I never told you, something I've regretted not saying since that last day on Maple Street." Emma looked up from Lily's feverish face, her heart skipping at the intensity in Daniel's eyes. But before he could continue, a sharp knock at the door made them both jump. Through the peephole, Emma saw Victoria, her designer handbag clutched like a weapon, her face set in grim determination. Somehow she had followed them. Behind her, Emma heard Daniel's sharp intake of breath. "Don't open it," he whispered, his hand finding Emma's shoulder. "Please, there's something you need to know first." Emma's hand trembled on the doorknob as Victoria knocked again, harder this time. The sound echoed through the small apartment, making Lily whimper on the couch. "Emma," Daniel said urgently, his voice barely above a whisper, "Victoria isn't just angry about the divorce. She's desperate because she knows I discovered her embezzlement from my company. She's been stealing for years, hiding money in accounts I didn't know about. When I found out, she tried to blame it on my CFO. But I have proof. That's the real reason for our divorce." Before Emma could process this revelation, Victoria's voice cut through the door. "I can hear you in there, Daniel. Your car's outside. Do you really want me to make a scene? Because I will." Emma glanced at Lily, who was watching the door with wide, frightened eyes. Making a decision, she stepped into the hallway, closing the apartment door behind her to face Victoria alone. "This has nothing to do with me or my daughter," Emma said firmly, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "Please leave." Victoria's perfectly made-up face twisted into a sneer. "Oh, it has everything to do with you." Did he tell you about our reconciliation dinner last week? How he begged me to come back?" She pulled out her phone, showing Emma photos of her and Daniel at an upscale restaurant. Emma's heart sank, but before she could respond, Daniel emerged from the apartment. "Those photos are from 2 months ago, Victoria. The dinner where you tried to convince me to fire James if he testified about the missing funds. Stop trying to manipulate everyone around you." Victoria's composure cracked. "You ungrateful bastard. I helped build that company. Those accounts were insurance for our future. If you go through with this, You'll what?" a new voice interrupted. They all turned to see an older woman climbing the stairs, her silver hair elegant despite the humid day. "Still causing trouble, Victoria?" Daniel's eyes widened. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Margaret Carter straightened her designer blazer as she reached their landing. "When you missed our breakfast meeting, I had your office ping your phone. Imagine my surprise when it led me here." Her eyes fell on Emma and she gasped softly. "Little Emma Thompson, is it really you?" Emma nodded, stunned by this new arrival. Margaret had aged gracefully, but she was unmistakably the same woman who used to bring cookies to their treehouse all those years ago. Victoria attempted to regain control. "Margaret, how nice. We were just discussing how you're leaving," Margaret cut in smoothly. "Now, before I call the fraud investigators myself," she turned to Emma, "I apologize for my former daughter-in-law's behavior. Some people never learn grace, no matter how many finishing schools they attend." Victoria's face flushed red. She opened her mouth to argue, but Margaret's unwavering stare made her think better of it. With a final glare at Daniel, she turned and clicked her way down the stairs in her expensive heels. "Mum," Daniel began, but Margaret held up a hand. "First, let's check on that sick child I heard crying. Then we can talk about why you didn't tell me you'd found Emma." Inside the apartment, Margaret went straight to Lily, her stern demeanor melting as she knelt beside the couch. "Hello, sweetheart. I'm Daniel's mommy. Would you like to hear a story about when he was little and got sick?" As Margaret entertained Lily with tales of young Daniel's chickenpox adventures, Emma pulled Daniel into her tiny kitchen. "Your mother? She's so different from what I remember." Daniel leaned against the counter, their shoulders almost touching in the cramped space. "After Dad died, she changed. Went back to school, got her MBA. She's been my company's CFO for the past 5 years. That's how we caught Victoria's theft. Mum noticed discrepancies in the accounts. Why didn't you tell me about Victoria's embezzlement at the coffee shop? I wanted to protect you from all this mess, but seeing you again..." He turned to face her fully. "Emma, remember when I said I had something to tell you? Something I regretted not saying that last day." Emma's heart raced as Daniel took her hand. From the living room, they could hear Lily giggling at Margaret's story. "I had a crush on you," Daniel admitted. "Even at 5 years old, I knew you were special. The day we moved, I left something in that time capsule. A note. Did you ever find it?" Emma shook her head, remembering how she'd been too upset to thoroughly check the contents when she dug it up. It said, "I love Emma. I'm going to marry her someday." "Childish, I know, but..." He squeezed her hand. "When I saw you this morning, counting those coins, that same feeling came rushing back. That need to take care of you, to be near you." "Daniel," Emma whispered, but he wasn't finished. "I'm not telling you this to pressure you. I know our lives are complicated, but I want you to know that my feelings are real. They always have been." A crash from outside made them jump apart. In the living room, they found Margaret standing protectively over Lily, staring at the window. A brick lay among shattered glass on the floor, a note wrapped around it. Daniel grabbed the note, his face darkening as he read. "Victoria's threatening to go to the press. She says she has evidence that I've been laundering money." "But that's not true," Emma protested. "Of course not," Margaret said calmly. "But she's desperate, and desperate people are dangerous." Lily began to cry, frightened by the breaking glass and tension in the room. Emma rushed to comfort her, but as she passed the window, she noticed a red dot dancing on her wall, a laser sight. "Everyone down!" Daniel shouted, lunging forward to tackle Emma and Lily to the floor as a shot rang out, shattering another window. In the chaos that followed, as sirens wailed in the distance and Margaret called the police, Emma held Lily close and met Daniel's eyes. In that moment, she realized that her simple life had been forever changed, and the little boy who once shared her treehouse might now be the only person who could help her survive what was coming. "Trust me," Daniel whispered, his arm still protective around them both. "I won't let anything happen to you, either of you. And despite everything, the danger, the complications, the vast differences in their lives," Emma found herself believing him. The next few hours passed in a blur of police sirens, detective interviews, and crime scene photographers documenting the shattered windows. Emma sat in a corner of her apartment, holding Lily close as she slept, exhausted from fever and fear. The police had confirmed what they already suspected. The shot had come from the building across the street, but the shooter was long gone. Margaret had taken charge of the situation with remarkable efficiency, coordinating with both the police and her private security team. Now she sat beside Emma, her hand occasionally reaching out to smooth Lily's hair. "You know," Margaret said softly, "I've regretted moving away from Maple Street every day since. When I saw those letters Daniel wrote you, I should have mailed them. Maybe things would have been different." Daniel returned from speaking with the detectives, his tie long discarded, shirt sleeves rolled up. "They found Victoria's car abandoned at Logan Airport," he reported. "She's used her passport. They think she's headed to the Cayman Islands. Where the accounts are," Margaret added grimly. "I've already frozen everything we could trace, but she had time to move some funds. The good news is we have enough evidence of the embezzlement to ensure she won't get away with it." Emma looked around her apartment, now crowded with law enforcement and crime scene technicians. The bridesmaid's dress she needed to alter hung forgotten on her sewing rack, the deadline now impossible to meet. Her whole life seemed to be unraveling, and yet, "You can't stay here tonight," Daniel said, kneeling beside her. "It's not safe. Mum's already arranged for us to use the company's secure apartment in Back Bay." "Us?" Emma asked, her voice wavering. "All of us," Margaret confirmed, "including Lily. Daniel's right. You need protection until Victoria is found." Emma thought of her tiny shop, her clients, her responsibilities. "I can't just leave. I have work and Lily has school." "Emma," Daniel said gently, taking her free hand, "let us help you, please. I've already lost you once. I can't bear the thought of anything happening to you or Lily." Looking into his eyes, Emma saw not just the wealthy businessman he'd become, but also the little boy who had once promised to protect her from imaginary dragons in their treehouse. Some things, it seemed, never changed. As they prepared to leave, Emma packed a small bag for herself and Lily. Her daughter stirred, looking up with fever-bright eyes. "Mommy, are we going on an adventure?" Emma smiled, fighting back tears. "Yes, sweetheart, just for a little while." The company apartment turned out to be a luxurious penthouse with panoramic views of the city. Under different circumstances, Emma might have felt overwhelmed by its grandeur. But tonight she was simply grateful for the security team stationed discreetly throughout the building. As she tucked Lily into one of the guest rooms, the little girl asked drowsily, "Is Mr. Daniel your prince, like in my stories?" Emma brushed her daughter's hair back, checking her temperature. The fever was finally breaking. "It's complicated, sweetie. But he looks at you like a prince," Lily insisted, drifting off to sleep. Later that night, Emma stood at the window, watching the city lights twinkle below. Daniel joined her, offering a cup of tea. "Mom's gone to meet with the FBI," he said. "They're optimistic about tracking Victoria down quickly. She's left quite a paper trail." Emma turned to face him. "Why didn't you tell me about the embezzlement sooner? I didn't want to drag you into this mess. When I saw you this morning, you were like a dream come true. A second chance I never thought I'd get. I was afraid if I told you everything you'd run. Instead, someone shot at us," Emma said with a hint of irony. Daniel winced. "Emma, I'm so sorry. I never imagined Victoria would go this far. But I promise you, once we find her—" "Daniel," Emma interrupted, "why did you really come to that coffee shop this morning?" He looked surprised. "I told you it was a coincidence." "Was it? In a city of nearly 700,000 people." Daniel was quiet for a moment, then reached for his phone. He pulled up a photo, an old newspaper clipping from 3 years ago. It showed Emma at a small fashion show, standing proudly beside a rack of altered vintage dresses. "I never stopped thinking about you," he admitted. "Over the years, I'd search your name online, hoping to find some trace. When I saw this article, I knew you were still in Boston. I'd go to that coffee shop every morning, hoping to run into you. For 6 months." Emma stared at him, her heart pounding. 6 months? "I knew it was your neighborhood. I couldn't bring myself to track you down directly. It felt too intrusive, but I couldn't stay away either. So this morning, when you saw me counting change, It took everything I had not to sweep you into my arms right there. He stepped closer, his hand finding hers. Emma, I know this isn't how either of us imagined reconnecting, but maybe it's exactly what needed to happen. All the barriers between us, time, money, circumstance, they don't matter anymore. What matters is that after 23 years, my heart still recognizes yours. Emma thought of the little boy who had written, "I'm going to marry her someday," and buried it in a time capsule. She thought of the man who had spent 6 months hoping to see her again, and she thought of how natural it had felt, watching him care for Lily today. "When Victoria's caught," she said slowly, "and all this is over, what then?" "Then," Daniel smiled, "I'd like to take you on a proper date. No ex-wives, no gunshots, no fever-stricken children. Just us getting to know each other again, and maybe—" He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a battered Hot Wheels car. "Maybe we could bury this again together, start fresh." Emma recognized it instantly, the car she'd kept all these years. He must have seen it on her bedroom shelf earlier. "How did you—" "Some treasures," he said softly, "are worth keeping close." 3 months later, on a crisp winter morning, Emma stood in her newly expanded boutique on Newbury Street. The sign above the door read, "Emma's Vintage Revivals," and the windows displayed her own designs alongside her alteration work. The charges against Victoria had stuck. She was awaiting trial after being caught in Grand Cayman, and Daniel's company had not only recovered, but thrived under his and Margaret's leadership. The bell above the door chimed, and Emma looked up to see Daniel and Lily entering, both carrying mysterious boxes. "Ready for lunch?" Daniel asked, kissing her cheek. "Almost," Emma smiled. "What's in the boxes?" Lily bounced excitedly. "It's a surprise, for the treehouse." Emma raised an eyebrow at Daniel, who shrugged innocently. "Well, every home needs a treehouse, even if that home happens to be a brownstone in Beacon Hill." As Emma locked up the boutique, she touched the small velvet box in her pocket, her own surprise for later. Inside was the Hot Wheels car, carefully restored, with a note that read, "Want to share a treehouse forever?" She already knew his answer,